Well, the transport was approximately 4 days as we were, and there were so many things happened even before the transport that probably I would skip it and go right into what to answer your question. We had no water, we had very little food, just the food which we took from home before. We had to board a cattle car, and there were a lot of people died, mainly children and older people. For instance, we were so compact, it was like sardines. If you sat, you couldn't get up, or vice versa. But on the fourth night, we arrived to Auschwitz, and we had to wait, and the train was waiting. Then, all of a sudden, the doors opened, slid open, and we were ordered out. As we stepped out, head prisoners called capos rushed at us using their whips, and so did the SS. They were beating, they kicking, they hitting everyone they could reach. Then we were ordered to form a line, stand in line, men in one, women and small children in the other, while the whip and the kicking and the beating was going on. After we lined up, I noticed that a high-ranking SS officer approached. That was the infamous Dr. Joseph Mengele, the angel of death, the man who would decide our fate, instant death in a gas chamber or lingering life of torture and slavery. We had to file by him. As we did, I noticed that he had a slender stick, actually was a conductor's baton, being a musician, even at 13. And so I recognized it. And he was waving it to the right or to the left. He was pointing which way each individual who filed by him to go. My mother and younger sister, Goldie, who was only 9 years old, she was motioned to the left, along with my mother. My older sister, Violet, was motioned to the opposite side, to the right. My brother Zoltan, who was 15, and my father, they next were in line, they were also motioned to the same side where Violet, my older sister. By the way, Violet was 18. I don't know if I mentioned it or not. When my turn came, to my great surprise, Mengele stopped me, motioned to stop. And he says, "Tell me, little boy, how old are you?" "I'm 13, I replied, previously coached to say more than I was, because this way I had a better chance to survive in being sent to work rather than being sent immediately to the gas chamber. When Mengele was sort of looking at me with a suspicion, suspiciously, because I really didn't look, not even 13. My frail body and pale, I didn't go out to play football, soccer with the boys, but I was always practicing the violin. So, but miraculously, he was motioning me to the group where my father and brothers were. After the selection were over, my mother, my younger sister, and the group that they were in were led away. I didn't know that I've seen them the last time. They were taken direct to the gas chamber, and they were told that they have to take a shower. In order to camouflage really what they wanted to do, the SS would issue a towel and a bar of soap. There was actually a house where was written the words Bade, means bath. And each one of them were issued a bar of soap and a towel, and then they said, you have to go in there and take a shower. But in reality, that was the gas chamber. As soon as they went in, the doors were locked behind them, and then the gas was flowing, and everybody in it died. The terrible thing, maybe to add to that, so I should say, that then the SS would send some of us prisoners to go and pick up the dead bodies and cart them away. When we were just getting to ourselves, what happened, we were taken to another barrack. We were stripped completely and had to take a real shower in the very same gas chamber where these wonderful people and then poor children were taken and were gassed. We really took a shower. Well, the gas where they're flowing through the pipes, now they let water through. I know because I was in it also, to shower, in reality. Then we were assigned to a barrack. We managed somehow to stay together, my father, my brother Zoltan, and me. And one night, as we were standing in line to be counted, that was the final count, and capo, which means head prisoner, came to our line, and he was speaking prisoners for what they called a Sonderkommando. And among other prisoners, he picked me too. A Sonderkommando had to go around the camp and pick up the dead or nearly dead bodies and cart them up to the crematoria. Now, being in the Sonderkommando, that meant separation from my father and brother. I was assigned to a different barrack. And one occasion, as I was picking up a body, I noticed that this man was not dead at all. And I turned to the capo and I said, "Hand capo, if we would give a little food or a little water, this man would survive." And then he turned around and hit me with his fist in my face so hard that I fell over. And he said, "You are not here to tell me who would survive. We're not here to make people survive. Now, if you're not going to keep your mouth shut, I'm going to put you in the crematorium also. Now, pick up that body and put him up." And we did it. I didn't say no more, anything. But all my life, even today, even as I am telling you this, I have the most awful feeling that I really had to burn my fellow prisoners, had to go and cart them up to the crematorium so that they would be burned. And they were alive. So we were doing this for about, maybe 6 days. Now in the Sonderkommando, there was a man who was about the same age as my father, and he had a son who was in the same barrack where my father and brother were. And the son was about the same age, maybe a year or two older than I. And he heard, word came to him that the very same barrack where his son was going to be evacuated, and they're going to go to France the very next day. So he contrived an ingenious plan, and he says, listen, I tell you what, because you like to be with your father and brother, and I certainly love to be with my son. Now, when you see that all the prisoners running from every direction to regroup the final count in the evening, go into the line where my son is, and my son is going to get into this line where this barrack line is, and nobody the wiser, because we were only numbers. So the plan worked. He was reunited with his son, and I got back in the barrack where my father and brother were. Next day, we were off to France. I found out later that the very same day when we were transported to France, all the Sonderkommandos were killed, because the SS feared if one of the commandos, specifically the commandos, would escape, would tell the world of the atrocities and of the terrible thing which the SS did to humanity. Because we were more witnesses to their machine, death machine, than any other prisoners. Because we were the one who were picking up dead bodies and took them and burned them on their order. And I tell you, the image of this father and son will haunt me for the rest of my life. Now, when we arrived in France, I was put to work in an ammunition factory. And in that factory, they were it was being built I don't know exactly if the V2 rocket, but a rocket which was designed specifically to shoot airplanes. And of course, mainly the Americans and the Russians. And that was such a tremendous force. All the airplane, if it got a contact with the rocket, it would be torn to pieces. I was cutting parts to that rocket. Then later, I was put to a machine which automatically filled explosive capsules with gunpowder. One day, a French prisoner approached me, and he says, "What would you do to stop Hitler's madness? Would you give up your life?" Without hesitation, I said, yes. This Frenchman, as I forgot to tell that what his rank was, he was actually a captain in the underground movement, resistance movement, who was smuggled among us as a prisoner. And he organized a sabotage movement. So this is how he approached me, and if I would be, because to him, I was the most important person, but by working on that machine which filled gunpowder, the capsules with gunpowder. And he said to me, "I tell you what, you see those civilians, those are all French men, electricians. They were working around the ammunition factory." And he says, "I tell you what you do. Now these men will supply you sand, and I want you to put in the capsule which you're filling with gunpowder, sand and very little gunpowder." So the machine that I was working would be filling the gunpowder automatically, as all I had to do just pull the arm. So, but now I had to put sand and mix it with the gunpowder. And it worked. I mean, it was fantastic how easy it really was to do that. One day, some new transport with new prisoners And another prisoner was put in that very near me, the machine, working, cutting parts. And it turned out that that was a SS spy. Wanted to know, they already detected, they found out that this weapon, the second stage in impact, did not work. And that was the idea. I didn't know that. I found out later that the sand was needed to, how can I say that, stop the second stage from exploding. And our leader was identified, this French captain. He was hanged, and all of us who were around that area had to watch him die, and we were not allowed to avert our eyes from him nor move away. After that, about 60 of us were put in a horizontal line and asked to stand still. It was stillstanden, or stand in attention maybe in English. And an SS officer was going down the line, picking prisoners at random. He passed me, and then was coming back and passed me again, and picked by the one next to me. And a third time, he still went down the line, just looking at prisoners which he sort of wanted to kill, and passed me again. 3 times I was to be taken to be shot to death, and all 3 times I was passed by. Now the one they were chosen, they had to step out of line, they were taken out of the camp and shot to death. We were sent back to the barrack, and then we were sent some couples, and we had a beating that I can't tell you. Our face and body and were puffed up, and many of them, their ribs were broken in because we were around that area. Now, I was a saboteur, and I was marked as such in the jacket on my back. And every time a couple would pass by me, or an SS officer or an SS guard, either would spit on me, or kick me. So I believe in God, because God saved my life so many times, that I was not picked yet, in spite of all the 3 times that the SS went by picking people at random, and it passed me by. I don't believe that was a coincidence. And it was God's way of protecting me. At any rate, about 2 weeks later that I had the saboteur jacket, all the jackets were taken from everybody. And for that, I couldn't believe it. We had back new jackets, which was cleaned. And the word saboteur disappeared from my jacket. So I was again not molested anymore as a saboteur, but freely could walk back and forth or where I was working. So I also give credit to God for that. Now, I must tell you something is an extremely interesting, and maybe 1 of the million or 10 million or 100 million that can happen. I have to go to Cleveland, Ohio for a second, because we are still with the sabotage things. When I was in Cleveland in 1950, early part of 1950, I was studying in the university, and one of my colleagues gave me a check. Now, he was American, Hungarian, and Jewish like myself, except I was not American, unfortunately. And he gave me a check to pay up a debt, which I been paying, and never got smaller. So he says, go in any bank and cash it. But you see, he didn't have an account in that bank or any bank in that area. And I didn't have an account anywhere at any bank. So, in fact, I didn't even speak English, very little. And I said to him, now, how do I do this? I mean, oh, no, he says, it's very simple. Here's the check. All you do, go up to the teller and just say, cash, cash. Give me cash. I said, that's all? He says, yeah. Now, I went into looked around where is a bank, and I'm coming from around lunchtime, you know, and I had certainly had to go back to school in the afternoon classes. So I saw a bank. So I go in there, Cleveland Trust, I remember now. And I went up to, waited in line, I went up to what was the teller, put down, and I said, cash, cash. And he looked at me. So in other words, we couldn't communicate. So he was a compassionate man. He said, okay, just a second. He came from his window and escorted me to the president's office. Now, he spoke several languages. Now, we're going to find out what this foreigner wants, he thought, probably. So I started with, I spoke to the president of the bank, and I said, Parlez-vous français? Sprechen Sie Deutsch? Magyarul in Hungarian? He says, Ich spreche Deutsch. I speak German. Thank God. So we waited a little because the teller had to find out if there is money on this account. And he says to me, well, why did he ask me if I speak French? Are you French? I said, no, I'm a Transylvanian. But I was in France. And then looking at my violin case being next to me, he says, did you study music there? I said, no. But then I related what I was doing in France, that I was doing sabotage and putting sand instead of filling up with sand, you know, with the gunpowder. And when actually one of these planes, or how the plane would be obliterated, and he sprang up from his chair, ran to me, grabbed my hand. God bless you, God bless you. I said, thank you, thank you. I mean, blessing comes always well, so I thank you for it. She says, now please, he saw my puzzled face. He says, please let me explain. My son and 9 crew, he was a captain over 9 crew, and they were bombing around that area where the ammunition factory was. And they were shot with one of these rockets, which penetrated the airplane but did not explode. I think they were caught in the wing or in the tail, whatever. And when they got back to their bases, very carefully they took that weapon, that rocket apart, to see why it did not explode. They found sand in the capsule. So we both hugged and started to cry, and I knew then that if I would have been killed and died, it would not be in vain, because I knew that at least 10 people, or nine plus the captain, 10 lives were saved because of my sabotage. In September, we were transferred from France into Kochendorf, which was a large salt mine, and it was a terrible, grueling work. And day of Yom Kippur, all of a sudden, the whole area of the salt mine became dark, completely dark. And we put our hammers down and sat down immediately. A little rest, at least a little rest. We thought it was God's will that on Yom Kippur, at least, you know, sending us something, darkness, that we can rest. And one of the prisoners started chanting the Kol Nidre. And honestly, I can hear it. I can hear it now. Like, then the other one got into. And then another one. We were also about 60 to 80 persons around there. And we're sitting, and then even those who did not know the words, and they did not probably even know the melody, but they were humming along. And in a minute or two, the entire section was full of the Kol Nidre, the song of the Yom Kippur. We didn't know that the S's, we were not aware of it, that the S's were listening in. Within 10 minutes, the whole problem was found, restored, and the light came out. Then we found out what was the source of the darkness. One of us, in fact, he was, which I did not put in my booklet, was a Hungarian Jew who used to show, he had secretly hidden his wife's and his little son's picture. And that gave him a little bit will of living, because constantly we had to talk him out of committing suicide, constantly. And that my father was the one who always said, no, you'll see, you're going to survive, and, you know. But he couldn't stand it any longer. And he went and cut the wire with a spoon made into, sharpened like it was like a knife. He was beaten severely until he fell unconscious. Then we had to form another line, exactly like it was in France. And one was picked, the other one was let go. Then he passed, the SS passed the two, then picked the third one, the fourth, then again. So here, half of them were picked, taken out, and shot to death. I also, again, was bypassed. So you have to puzzle, you have to think, how come I was saved one day before I would be killed as Sonderkommando. Then in France, I was bypassed 3 times. Now again, coincidences maybe. Who knows? I believe differently. So we were severely beaten, the one that we were not picked. In February 1945, my father turned 42, and we didn't have nothing to give him. We at home always used to exchange gifts. We children would put our little pennies together to buy for our parents' anniversary or birthday. But here we had nothing. The Nazis stripped us of everything. So I came up with the idea to give our ration of bread for the day to him as a birthday present. And I told Zoltan, and he liked the idea. So in the evening, we held out our hands and said, Father, for you. He wouldn't think of it. He knew that bread, that means nourishment, it means life. We were starving. In fact, we were on starving ration, and that was the idea. Let them work as long as they can and then drop dead, and then they're just going to take them away. We were not there, really, to ever to leave the concentration camp. Any of us, none of us. But here is the bread. No way, he says, I'm not going to take it. You need that little nourishment. But we kept on insisting, so finally, not wanting to hurt our feelings, he accepted the gift. And he said, thank God that allowed me to live long enough to witness that gracious love from my sons. It was like he would have sensed of being his last day on earth. Next morning at 5 o'clock, we were already in line to go to the salt mine, and one prisoner was missing. After several recons, the prisoner was still missing. The couples went into the barrack to look for him. They found the missing person sleeping in a corner, my father. So they dragged him in front of the SS. They picked him up from the collar, and it was bitter winter. And he just had his underalls, and it was practically nothing. And he was ordered to stand still or in attention. And then the capo went to the SS and was whispering something. So then the SS turned to the rest of the assembly, and he said, I understand that the early Jewish dog has here 2 sons. I want them to step out of line and come next to him and see what his punishment is going to be. Because he kept Germany from victory 10 minutes, because that's how long it took to find him. Then he gave a hard, swift kick to my father, and this signaled the capos to start the punishment. From every side, every corner, they started hitting and kicking and beating him until he fell on the ground. And Zoltan and I went on our knees and begged the SS to stop it. Then went and tried to grab the arm of the capos. Then the hitting and the beating and the whipping were on our backs. And they were beating my father until he collapsed and was so badly beaten it was unrecognizable. I started to chant the 22nd Psalm. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. O God, my God, why hast thou forsaken us? So the beating finally stopped when my father was motionless, except for his lips. And I saw that he was trying to say something. And I came close, and then I heard he was reciting the Shema, the declaration of the faith of the Jew to God. And it says, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Then he became very silent. He didn't speak no more. He didn't move no more. Zoltan and I went off to the salt mine. The first time in my life that I lost faith in God. I was born in an Orthodox family. My father was a wonderful, wonderful human being, a very pious Jew, that he wouldn't harm a soul. In fact, in the concentration camp, he kept people alive, really alive. Lots of them went and touched the barbed wire to end. They couldn't stand it any longer. And he used to say, no, you'll see, like God sent Moses to get the children of Israel out of Egypt, out of bondage, you will see that he will send somebody to free us. And in fact, to take us back to Eretz Israel, that means to our homeland, Israel. And it was like he foresaw that, like it was a prediction, or not a prediction, it was a prophecy, sort of, you know. But now that wonderful man, no more. And I said, if God allowed that to happen, there is no God. If God allowed for him to be killed, then I don't believe anymore. And thank God that it didn't last long, because in the very same night, in my dream, my father appeared. And he said, called me on my Hebrew name, Yitzchak. He says, don't ever lose your faith in God. God is real, and you'll see that you will survive. But what was so strange to me, that he said you singular. He didn't say the plural you. Meant that you and Zoltan will survive. He said you will survive. Meanwhile, Zoltan was so angry and so out of beside him, what we witnessed, that he said he's going to go and grab this SS guard's neck, or SS officer's neck, and he's going to choke him to death. I said, you couldn't get 2 feet next to him, close to him. Not even 2 feet, you will be shot. He says, no, I will do it. You'll see I will do it. And Zoltán was, even though that he was not quite 16 years old, he was very, very strong. Since, like some people practice God knows what all day long, he was muscle, build up, bodybuilder. I mean it incredibly so. And he says, no, and I just grab it and I crush him to death because he killed our father. And I said, Zoltán, I tell you something, miracle happened, Zoltán. My father appeared to me in my dream, and he said, we should believe there is a God, and we should never lose our faith in God because we're going to survive. He said that. You know, our father, even in dream, said he never said anything that wasn't so. So Zoltán gave up the idea of killing, because that would be killing himself right away. Now, not long after that, in the beginning of April, we were transported from Kohendorf to Dachau. The trip from Kohendorf to Dachau was the worst that I have ever encountered. For instance, on one occasion, the SS stopped the train. They were American flyers, very, very low. They wanted to see what is a train, because they're always cattle cars, you know? We were transported in cattle cars. We were so packed that I'm telling you, worse than when we went to Dachau. I mean to Auschwitz. The Dachau trip was the worst I've ever experienced. We were, for instance, you couldn't even sit down. Once you sat, like the similar in Auschwitz, except in going toward Auschwitz, it was a little more, even if we didn't have no food and no water, but at least there was some more room that we could move a little bit better. But here there was no way. And the worst was that if you tried to move, then bickering among prisoners themselves, because they were trying to, and they were shoving and pushing and hitting with the elbows among prisoners. So what happened is the American flyers came low enough because they wanted to see the SS stop the train and took cover under it, and they start shooting at the airplane, at the pilots, fighter pilots. They shot back. The Americans shot back, and the bullets would go through the top of that cattle car, unfortunately hitting quite a few of the prisoners. After we arrived to Dachau, I knew if something wouldn't happen soon, I would not survive. I could hardly walk, let alone do the chores or the work that I was required to do. For a second, I'd like to go back to my childhood. When I was 4 years old, I got lost in the forest. My governess we went for a walk and we landed in the forest. And she sat down. After a while, we got tired, and she said later that she fell asleep. And when she woke up, I was nowhere to be found. I was wandering around and hopelessly lost. I started crying. And a little gypsy woman, a young gypsy woman, I should say, was picking mushrooms or flowers, heard my cry, and took me into their gypsy camp. And this is the first time in my life that I heard violin music. And it was beautiful. They could make it sound like a bird, chirp like a bird. They could play fast, they could play sweet, slow. I was just drawn to it. So later on, when finally I was found, I said to my parents, I want this. And I'm mimicking the violin. I want that. I want this. After about, I was 4 years old, as I mentioned, but a year later, when I was 5, then finally they gave in, since every single day I was pestering them for the violin, and I started formally taking lessons. When I was 10, I gave a concert. It was my first debut in Radio Bucharest. And 13, I finished the conservatory, which the diploma is right there. So it seems like my career was really well established to go into something high. However, a man named Hitler thought it differently. Now here I am in Dachau, and I was just praying, God, if you're not going to help me, I'm not going to survive. And one night thereafter, an SS came to the barrack holding a violin up and announcing, who can play the violin to come to the front room, and if I like the playing, I'm gonna give food and water. When you mentioned food, we would do anything, and water. I mean anything. We couldn't think, talk. We dreamt about food. Nothing else we had but food, food, food. So hungry. So I eagerly volunteered, and so did 2 others. So we went to the front room, where 3 capos, the SS, and the barrack doctor were waiting. And the violin was handed to the older one. It's about a 40-year-old man who tuned it, and the first few notes were shaky because he hadn't played the violin about a year or so, like myself. But thereafter, he started to play Chaconne, Bach Chaconne, one of the sonatas, so beautifully that I have never heard anything like that in my life. And I thought, what am I doing here? I mean, the man is going to get the food. The SS grimaced. He didn't like it and signaled the capos. One capo went and took the violin away from this wonderful violinist. The other one picked up an iron pipe and walked behind this wonderful man, and he hit him so hard that he cracked his skull open. Blood and brain was splattered all over the floor. I got terribly scared. I've seen death around me, but nothing like that. And immediately I realized, like in the past, they don't want really playing. They did not want any violin music. They just away. That's a joke. Now we kill another one, and we're having fun by that. So now the violin was handed to the next man, who was about 25, and he was so scared that he couldn't play a straight note. He was standing there shivering. I never found out if he could or could not play. The SS was terribly angry. Says, you said you came out, how do you dare come out and say that you can play? And you expect me to give you food for this? They started kicking him, and they were beating him to death. Now was my turn. When I came out of the barrack, I was intending, if I have a chance to play, I'm going to play a sonatina by Dvorak, or one of those encore pieces, beautiful pieces by Fritz Kreisler. After all, I was classically trained. But I was scared stiff. My mind went blank. And I get to myself, my God, how does the sonatina start? How does Fritz Kreisler piece start? How does anything start? I was just completely blank. And I noticed that the murder capo went for his pipe again. was picking up and picked up his pipe and was walking toward me. Every nerve in my body was concentrating on the blow that I'm going to get killed now. And I was standing there about maybe a few seconds, maybe 5, maybe 10, motionless. And then, incredibly, my right hand and my left hand started to move in perfect harmony. And that's what came out of the violin. The beautiful Blue Danube Waltz. Everybody looked at the SS and the couple with an iron pipe waiting for the sign. When shall I hit him? But the couple was singing, humming the melody, and he was stepping his fingers on the table, which like it was, pa, 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 pa. So hitting the rhythm. And then let him live. So really, honestly, I got food, but I was so terribly overtaken by what I've noticed, what I witnessed, that I couldn't eat it. So, but they let me live. The capo picked up his guitar and accompanied me, and that gave the SS an idea. So that wasn't the only time that I played for them. We had to go and entertain the SS. And after that specific debut, which I did in the front room, I could play anything. It was okay. I could play anything. But when the SS got tired of our playing, the capo came along and accompanied me on the guitar. Then they played differently. He says, "Now, das ist genug. Das is enough." So there we had to stand next to a brick wall, both of us, the couple also, and they were shooting at us. They were, I have to say the truth, they were excellent shots. They were missing. They were aiming at my head, for instance, right between my eyes, aiming, and then the last second, a little move, and the bullet went above my head or on the side of me. And sometimes it came so close that I could feel the wind of the bullet. If somebody didn't have that, they don't know what I'm talking about, you know. And every single time, almost was praying. I said, "God, please let him kill me, because it's too much. It's just 10 or 15 shooting at you." And at the end, I looked like a bloody mess, because from the brick wall, a little chunk of bricks would sometimes hit me and it would cut me, but they never touched. Our bullets were not until later. One day, an SS came to our barrack and said, "Jews, Poles, Germans," meaning prisoners, "out of the barrack, and Russians too. We're going to be evacuated. The Americans are close, and they did not want us to fall in the Americans' hand." So the barrack doctor will come, and he said, the barrack doctor is there, and he's going to determine who is going to walk, who is able to walk. It will walk. That's the very famous death march, by the way. And the others are going to be put on cattle cars or on the train and gonna be evacuated and going to Tyrol. However, the truth was that we were taken in a forest nearby, and the barrack doctor was also brought just to camouflage the whole thing, so that we're not going to find out really why we've been taken in the forest, or taken out of the barrack, in fact. Now, he knew, and he was helping people to get organized, put in a horizontal line. But the machine guns were hidden from our view, ready to fire. And then all of a sudden, he said to me, turned to me, this doctor says, Alex, run. And I then realized that it was no evacuation, it is the end. And I ran right into the forest for cover. And as I was running, again chanting the Shema Yisrael, the Shema, which is declaration of faith of the Jew, something terribly hot entered my chest. And then I had difficulty breathing, and I fell. And I was on the ground, and I saw that blood was flowing down on my body. And the doctor noticed the same thing, and I did not hear a shot. Otherwise, I did not hear the sound of the shot. I just heard something hit me, and I am blood flowing, but I did not hear the shot. And then I had difficulty breathing. The doctor came right away, ran toward me, and he sort of, with one knee down on the floor, and took my pulse. And an SS guard was running right behind him with drawn revolver, aiming to my head. And then this wonderful French doctor sort of turned back to him, and he says, "Don't shoot. 3 minutes, kaput. Don't shoot. In 3 minutes, he'll be dead." So the SS turned to the doctor and says, "Let this dirty Jewish duck suffer the 3 minutes, because he's not worth the cost of another bullet." So he went and signaled another one of his compatriots, and they started the shooting. And the machine gun, that day, were something like 17,000 killed. Machine gunning. Of course, they started a day before, I'm sure, or two, but we didn't know about it. And when the trucks came and the bodies were thrown on the truck and carried back to the camp to be cremated or thrown in a ditch, the doctor gave order. These French prisoners were the one who helped now. They were the Sonderkommando. And he told them that when they take him back, he picked me up and threw me on the top of the bodies. And I don't know anything about it. I was unconscious. But you can see how many dead bodies were among them, because I was just wounded. Mortally wounded, but I was not dead. Meanwhile, we were supposed to be thrown in the ditch or be cremated. But as I said, when we arrived back to the camp, they took me off of these bodies and took me into a French barrack. And then he changed the insignia of a Jew to a Frenchman, to a French origin. He had a tweezer, a pocket knife. He fished the bullet out of my chest without any anesthetic. And next day, the wonderful Americans liberated Dachau. And the first thing what they did, the Americans' attention were called on the very sick ones and the mortally wounded ones or wounded ones. And this is how somebody called the attention on me to the Americans. And they took me immediately to the hospital in Dachau, by the way. It's still in Dachau first. And they attended to me. So I was told later that the doctors found very definitely that I will not survive, because I had tuberculosis, I had blood poisoning, and I had typhoid fever, among other things, plus being malnutrition and frozen feet.